David woke up that Saturday morning with something he hadn't felt in months: genuine excitement. The sun was streaming through the curtains of his penthouse apartment, and for once he didn't immediately reach for his phone to check stock prices or urgent emails from his tech company. Instead, he looked over at the small bed across the room where his 4-year-old daughter Sophie was still sleeping, clutching her favorite stuffed rabbit. Today was going to be special. He had promised Sophie they would go to the big spring festival downtown, just the two of them. No bodyguards, no assistants, no business calls. Just a dad and his little girl having fun like any normal family would. David quietly made breakfast, trying not to wake Sophie too early. As he flipped pancakes, he thought about how much his life had changed. 2 years ago, he was married to the love of his life, Lisa, and they were building their dream together. He was focused on growing his software company, working 16-hour days, always promising Lisa he'd slow down once the next deal closed or after the next product launch. Then cancer took Lisa away in just 8 months. Everything changed overnight. Suddenly, David was a single father trying to figure out how to run a multi-million-dollar company while taking care of a 2-year-old who kept asking when mommy was coming home. The first year was the hardest. Sophie would cry for hours asking for her mom. David hired the best nannies money could buy, but nothing seemed to help. He realized that all the money in the world couldn't replace what Sophie really needed: her parents' love and attention. That's when David made a decision that shocked everyone around him. He stepped back from day-to-day operations of his company, hired a team of excellent managers, and decided to focus on being the father Sophie deserved. It wasn't easy. There were still long days and difficult nights, but slowly they both began to heal. "Daddy," Sophie's excited voice pulled him back to the present. She had woken up and was standing in the doorway in her pajamas, her brown hair sticking up in every direction. "Are we really going to the festival today?" David scooped her up and spun her around, making her giggle. "We absolutely are, sweetheart. But first, let's get you some breakfast." As Sophie ate her pancakes, she chattered excitedly about all the things she wanted to see at the festival. She had been talking about it for weeks after seeing the colorful posters around the city. There would be rides, games, food trucks, and live music. Most importantly to Sophie, there would be a carousel with painted horses. "And cotton candy, Daddy? Pink cotton candy?" she asked with syrup on her chin. "Yes, Princess. Pink cotton candy, just like you wanted." David's security chief, Robert, had called 3 times that morning, insisting that David should at least bring 1 bodyguard to such a crowded public event. David understood the concern. As the CEO of one of the fastest-growing tech companies in the country, he was worth over $50 million. There had been a few incidents in the past, nothing serious but enough to warrant professional security. But today was different. David wanted Sophie to experience what it felt like to be a normal kid with her dad. He wanted to stand in line for rides, buy overpriced festival food, and not worry about photographers or people recognizing him. He wanted to give Sophie the childhood experience that his own busy schedule had often prevented. After breakfast, they got ready together. Sophie insisted on wearing her favorite dress, a bright yellow one with tiny flowers that Lisa had bought for her just before she got too sick to go shopping. David helped her brush her teeth and comb her hair, tying it back with a red ribbon that matched her little sneakers. "Do I look pretty, Daddy?" Sophie asked, spinning around to show off her outfit. "You look beautiful, just like your mom," David said softly, and Sophie beamed with pride. The drive downtown took longer than expected due to festival traffic, but Sophie didn't mind. She pressed her face against the car window, watching all the families walking toward the park with balloons and snacks. Her excitement was contagious, and David found himself genuinely looking forward to the day ahead. When they finally arrived at the festival, David was amazed by the sheer size of the crowd. The entire downtown park had been transformed into a wonderland of colorful tents, food stands, and carnival rides. The smell of popcorn and fried food filled the air, and cheerful music played from multiple stages scattered throughout the grounds. "Wow, Daddy. It's even bigger than on TV!" Sophie exclaimed, bouncing on her toes as they walked through the main entrance. David bought them both wristbands and got a festival map, though Sophie was already pulling him toward the first attraction she spotted: a ring toss game with giant stuffed animals as prizes. "Can we play, Daddy? I want to win the big teddy bear." They spent the first hour going from game to game. David was terrible at most of them, but he didn't care. Watching Sophie's face light up with joy at each new discovery was worth more than any business deal he'd ever closed. She squealed with delight at the balloon animals, clapped her hands at the face painters, and insisted they take at least 20 photos together. The festival was incredibly crowded, families everywhere, children running around with balloons, teenagers taking selfies, elderly couples sitting on benches watching the entertainment. David estimated there had to be at least 50,000 people spread across the park grounds. After trying several games and rides, Sophie finally spotted what she'd been waiting for, the carousel. Her eyes grew wide as she watched the beautiful painted horses going up and down to the cheerful circus music. "That one, Daddy. I want to ride the white horse with the pink saddle." They waited in line for about 15 minutes, with Sophie getting more excited by the minute. She waved at other children and pointed out all the different horses, explaining which ones were her second and third choices in case the white one was taken. When it was finally their turn, David helped Sophie onto her chosen horse and stood beside her as the ride began. For those few minutes, as Sophie laughed and waved at him with each turn, David felt something he hadn't experienced in a long time: pure, uncomplicated happiness. No business worries, no grief, no fear about the future, just a perfect moment with his daughter. As they got off the carousel, Sophie was practically glowing with excitement. "That was the best ride ever, Daddy. Can we get cotton candy now?" "Of course we can," David said, taking her small hand in his as they walked toward the food vendors. It was at that moment, as they approached the row of colorful food trucks, that David noticed how incredibly crowded this section of the festival had become. People were packed together, moving slowly, and he had to keep a firm grip on Sophie's hand to make sure they didn't get separated in the crowd. That's when Sophie spotted something that made her gasp with delight: a balloon vendor with dozens of colorful balloons shaped like animals and cartoon characters. "Daddy, look, they have butterfly balloons just like the ones Mommy used to buy me." David's heart squeezed at the memory, but he smiled and nodded. "Would you like one, sweetheart?" "Yes, please. The purple one." And that's how everything changed. In the few seconds it took David to reach for his wallet and pay the balloon vendor, while his attention was focused on the transaction, and Sophie stood right beside him, she saw something that caught her attention even more than the balloons: a small pond at the edge of the festival grounds, where a group of children were laughing and feeding ducks with breadcrumbs their parents had brought. Sophie loved animals, and the sight of the friendly ducks swimming around was irresistible. In the way that only a 4-year-old can move, she slipped away from her father's side and started walking toward the pond, her yellow dress bright in the afternoon sun. David finished paying for the balloon, turned to hand it to Sophie, and felt his world collapse. She was gone. David stared at the empty space where Sophie had been standing just seconds before. The purple butterfly balloon bobbed in his hand as his eyes frantically searched the immediate area. Maybe she had just stepped behind someone. Maybe she was right there and he just couldn't see her because of the crowd. "Sophie?" he called out, his voice still calm but with a growing edge of concern. "Sophie, where are you, honey?" He took a few steps in each direction, looking behind the balloon cart, checking near the cotton candy stand, peering around groups of families. His heart was starting to beat faster, but he told himself to stay calm. She couldn't have gone far. It had only been a few seconds. "Sophie," he called louder now, his voice carrying over the festival music and chatter. A few people nearby turned to look at him, but there was no sign of his little girl in her bright yellow dress. David approached a woman with 2 young children who had been standing near the balloon vendor. "Excuse me, did you see a little girl in a yellow dress? About 4 years old, brown hair with a red ribbon?" The woman looked sympathetic but shook her head. "I'm sorry, I didn't notice. There are so many children here today." That's when the real panic started to set in. David's hands began to shake as he realized that Sophie wasn't just a few feet away playing hide and seek. She was actually missing. In a crowd of 50,000 people, his 4-year-old daughter had vanished. He started moving faster through the crowd, pushing past families and festival goers, calling Sophie's name repeatedly. "Sophie, Sophie, where are you?" "It's Daddy?" His voice was getting hoarse already, but he couldn't stop shouting. Every few seconds, he would spot a flash of yellow in the distance and his heart would leap, only to discover it was another child in a yellow shirt or a woman carrying a yellow purse. Each false alarm made the reality sink in deeper. Sophie was really gone. David pulled out his phone with trembling fingers and dialed Robert, his head of security. Robert picked up on the first ring. David, how's the festival going? Sophie's missing, David said, his voice cracking. She was right next to me at the balloon stand, and now she's gone. I can't find her anywhere. There was a brief pause, then Robert's voice became all business. How long has it been? Maybe 5 minutes. I don't know, it feels like forever. Okay, stay calm. Keep looking, but don't leave the immediate area. I'm mobilizing the team right now. We'll be there in 15 minutes. Have you contacted festival security yet? David looked around frantically. No, I don't even know where they are. Look for anyone in a bright green vest or shirt. That's festival security. Tell them immediately. I'll also call the police while I'm driving over. David hung up and continued his desperate search, now looking for both Sophie and festival security. He found a security guard near the main stage area and ran up to him, almost out of breath. My daughter is missing, he said urgently. She's 4 years old, wearing a yellow dress with flowers, brown hair with a red ribbon. She disappeared about 10 minutes ago near the balloon vendor. The security guard, a middle-aged man with kind eyes, immediately pulled out his radio. We have a missing child. 4-year-old female. Yellow dress with flowers, brown hair with red ribbon. Last seen near the balloon vendor on the east side. All units begin immediate search. What's your name, sir? The guard asked David. David Chen. I'm here with just my daughter. No one else. Okay, David, I'm Officer Martinez. We deal with missing children at large events more often than you'd think. And the good news is we almost always find them quickly. Kids get distracted by something interesting and wander off. They usually don't go far. David wanted to believe him, but as each minute passed, his fear grew stronger. This wasn't like Sophie. She was a good listener. She always stayed close to him in crowded places because he had taught her to. Something felt very wrong. More security guards appeared within minutes, spreading out to search different sections of the festival. Officer Martinez stayed with David, coordinating the search over his radio while they continued looking together. Sophie, David kept calling. Sophie, if you can hear Daddy, come to my voice. They searched methodically through each section of the festival. The game area where they had played ring toss earlier. The food court where families sat at picnic tables eating carnival treats. The kiddie ride section with miniature trains and spinning teacups. No sign of her anywhere. Other parents began to notice the search and approached to help. A mother with twin boys about Sophie's age came up to David with tears in her eyes. I heard about your little girl. We'll help look. What is she like? What would attract her attention? Animals, David said immediately. She loves animals. And playgrounds. And she was excited about feeding ducks. She saw some kids doing that earlier. There's a small pond on the north side of the park, the woman said. Past the craft vendors. It's a bit separate from the main festival area. David's heart jumped. That must be where Sophie had been trying to go when she slipped away from him. How do I get there? Officer Martinez overheard and spoke into his radio. Unit 7 and 12, check the pond area on the north side. Possible attraction point for missing child. As they hurried toward the pond area, David's phone rang. It was Robert. We're here, Robert said. I brought 6 men. We're spreading out now. Any updates? Festival security is helping. We think she might have gone toward a pond to see some ducks. That's where we're heading now. Good. I've also spoken to the police. They're sending units, but they said they usually wait at least an hour before issuing an Amber Alert for a missing child at a public event like this, especially if there's no evidence of abduction. An hour felt like a lifetime to David. They reached the pond area, which was quieter than the main festival grounds. There were some craft vendors and a small playground, but fewer people overall. The pond itself was peaceful, with several families sitting on benches watching their children feed bread to the ducks. David approached every family there, showing them a photo of Sophie on his phone. Have you seen this little girl? She was wearing a yellow dress. One older gentleman thought he might have seen her earlier, but he wasn't sure. A young mother with a baby said she hadn't noticed, but promised to keep an eye out. They searched the playground thoroughly, checking behind every piece of equipment, looking under slides and in play structures. Nothing. By now, David's security team had arrived and spread out across the festival grounds. They were more systematic than the festival security, checking vendor booths, storage areas, even the parking lots. David gave them recent photos of Sophie from his phone, and they began showing her picture to anyone who would look. The festival security had also stepped up their efforts. Officer Martinez explained that they had contacted the festival organizers, who were now making announcements over the loudspeaker system every few minutes. "We're looking for 4-year-old Sophie Chen, wearing a yellow dress with flowers and a red hair ribbon. If you see her, please bring her to the nearest security guard or the main information tent." Each time David heard Sophie's name over the loudspeaker, his heart broke a little more. This was really happening. His little girl was truly missing at this massive public event. And despite having more than a dozen people actively searching for her, there was still no trace. The sun was starting to move lower in the sky, and David realized they had been searching for over an hour. The festival was still crowded, but some families were beginning to leave. What if someone had taken Sophie and was already driving away? What if she had wandered beyond the festival grounds entirely? These thoughts terrified him, but he couldn't stop searching. Somewhere in this crowd of thousands of people, his 4-year-old daughter needed him to find her. 2 hours had passed since Sophie disappeared, and David felt like he was living in a nightmare he couldn't wake up from. Every corner of the festival grounds had been searched multiple times. Every vendor had seen her picture. Every security guard knew her description by heart. Yet somehow his 4-year-old daughter had vanished without a trace. David stood near the main information tent, which had become the unofficial command center for the search. His security team leader, Robert, was coordinating with festival organizers, while police officers took down detailed information about Sophie's disappearance. The cheerful festival music still played in the background, but to David, it sounded mocking now. "We've searched the entire festival grounds twice," Robert reported, approaching David with a grim expression. "My team has checked every booth, every ride, every bathroom, even the staff areas and storage tents. Festival security has done the same. There's no sign of her here." David's legs felt weak. What does that mean? Where could she be? Officer Martinez from festival security joined them. "Mr. Chen, I want you to know that we've never had a child simply vanish like this. Usually when kids go missing at events like this, we find them within the first hour. They're either hiding somewhere playing, they've followed another family thinking it was their parents, or they've gotten scared and found a quiet place to wait. But Sophie knows her name and my phone number," David said desperately. "I taught her to find a police officer or security guard if she was ever lost. She's a smart kid. She wouldn't just hide." The unspoken implication hung in the air. If Sophie wasn't hiding somewhere in the festival, then someone might have taken her. David felt sick just thinking about it. Robert pulled David aside. "I think we need to expand the search beyond the festival grounds. I've got 3 more men coming, and I want to start checking the surrounding neighborhoods, parking areas, and nearby businesses. Also," he hesitated, "I think we should offer a reward. A significant one. Sometimes that motivates people to pay attention, to really think about what they might have seen." David nodded immediately. "Whatever it takes. $100,000. More if needed." Within an hour, the reward announcement was being broadcast every 10 minutes over the festival's speaker system. "We are offering a $100,000 reward for information leading to the safe return of 4-year-old Sophie Chen. She was wearing a yellow dress with flowers and a red hair ribbon. Please contact security immediately if you have any information." The announcement had an immediate effect. Dozens of people approached the information tent with potential sightings. David's heart leaped with hope each time someone came forward, only to crash again when each lead turned out to be another child or a false memory. A teenage girl swore she had seen Sophie near the petting zoo an hour ago, but when they checked, the staff there had no record of her. An elderly man was certain he had spotted her getting into a car in the parking lot, but his description of the car changed 3 times during questioning, and security cameras showed no evidence to support his claim. Each false lead was torture for David, but he followed up on every single one personally. He couldn't bear the thought that the one lead he didn't investigate might have been the real one. That's when the news crews started arriving. Word had gotten out about the missing child and the substantial reward, and local television stations began setting up cameras near the festival entrance. David watched them with mixed feelings. On one hand, more publicity meant more people would be looking for Sophie. On the other hand, it made the situation feel more real, more serious, more terrifying. A reporter from Channel 7 News approached David while he was talking to police officers. "Mr. Chen, I'm Jessica Williams from Channel 7. We'd like to help get Sophie's picture out to our viewers. Would you be willing to speak with us?" David looked at the camera and felt overwhelmed. This was really happening. His little girl was missing, and now it was going to be on the evening news. But if it helped find Sophie, he would do anything. Yes, he said quietly, if it helps bring her home. The interview was brief but heartbreaking. David held up his favorite photo of Sophie, one from last month where she was laughing and holding an ice cream cone, her brown eyes sparkling with joy. As he described what she was wearing and when she was last seen, his voice cracked with emotion. Sophie is everything to me, he said to the camera. She's the light of my life. I just want her to come home safely. If anyone has seen her, please call the number on your screen. Please. Within minutes of the news segment airing, the police tip line was flooded with calls. Most were well-meaning but unhelpful. People who thought they might have seen a child in yellow at various locations around the city. But David was grateful for every single person who took the time to call. As the afternoon stretched into early evening, David's worst fears began to surface. What if someone had taken Sophie for ransom? As a wealthy tech entrepreneur, David knew he was a potential target. What if criminals had been watching him, waiting for an opportunity when he was vulnerable and alone with his daughter? Even worse thoughts crept into his mind. What if Sophie had been taken by someone who had no intention of asking for money? David had read too many horrible news stories about missing children to ignore the darkest possibilities. He called his assistant and had her immediately transfer $5 million into an account he could access instantly. If someone contacted him for ransom, he wanted to be able to pay immediately, no questions asked. But as the hours passed, no ransom demand came. No one called claiming to have Sophie. The silence was somehow worse than any threat would have been. The police had officially issued an Amber Alert by now, and Sophie's picture was on every smartphone in the Seattle area. Digital billboards around the city displayed her photo. Radio stations were broadcasting her description every hour. Detective Sarah Wilson, the lead investigator assigned to Sophie's case, sat down with David as the sun began to set. Mr. Chen, I want you to know that we have every available officer working on this. We've reviewed all the security camera footage from the festival and surrounding areas. We've interviewed dozens of witnesses. We have officers checking every hotel, motel, and rental property within a 50-mile radius. Do you think someone took her? David asked directly. Detective Wilson chose her words carefully. At this point, we're investigating all possibilities. The fact that she hasn't been found at the festival despite extensive searches suggests she left the immediate area, either on her own or with someone else. We're treating this as a potential abduction, which means we're using all our resources. David felt like he couldn't breathe. The word abduction made it all too real. His sweet, innocent little girl might be in the hands of a stranger, scared and crying for her daddy. As darkness began to fall over the festival grounds, most families had gone home. The cheerful atmosphere had been replaced by searchlights and police tape around certain areas. David refused to leave, though. He couldn't bear the thought of going home to their empty apartment while Sophie was still out there somewhere. Robert approached him with an update. We've expanded the search to a 10-mile radius now. I have teams checking every business, every park, every possible location where someone might take a child. The FBI has been contacted and they're sending agents to assist. The FBI. David's legs nearly gave out. When the FBI gets involved in a missing child case, it means they think the worst has happened. But he had to stay strong. Somewhere out there, Sophie needed him to keep fighting, to keep searching, to never give up hope. The festival lights were beginning to twinkle in the growing darkness, but David barely noticed. He had been searching for Sophie for over 4 hours now, and each passing minute felt like an eternity. His voice was completely hoarse from calling her name. His feet ached from walking miles through the festival grounds and surrounding neighborhoods, and his heart felt like it was breaking into smaller pieces with each false lead. Robert approached him near the main information tent, where David had been pacing like a caged animal. David, you need to eat something. You need to sit down for a few minutes. You're going to collapse if you keep this up. I can't stop looking, David said, his voice barely a whisper. She's out there somewhere. What if she's scared? What if she's calling for me and I'm not there? Detective Wilson had been coordinating search efforts from her mobile command unit, parked near the festival entrance. She walked over to David, her expression serious but not without hope. Mr. Chen, I want you to know that we've now expanded the search to include every business, every residential area, and every public space within a 15-mile radius. We have over 50 officers working on this case. The FBI agents arrived an hour ago and they're reviewing all our evidence and coordinating with other agencies. David nodded, trying to stay strong, but inside he was falling apart. Any new leads? We've had dozens of calls from people who saw the news report. Most of them don't pan out, but we're investigating every single one. There was one call that might be promising. A woman who works at a grocery store about 8 miles from here said she thought she saw a man with a young girl in a yellow dress around 3 o'clock. We sent officers to check the security cameras there. David's heart jumped. And? The footage wasn't clear enough to be certain it was Sophie. The child was about the right age and size, but we couldn't see her face clearly. We're still investigating. As Detective Wilson walked away to coordinate with her team, David felt more helpless than he had ever felt in his life. He was a successful businessman who was used to solving problems with money, resources, and determination. But this was different. All the money in the world couldn't help him if he didn't know where to look. Robert's phone buzzed and he answered it immediately. David watched his face carefully, looking for any sign of good news. After a brief conversation, Robert hung up with a puzzled expression. That was Officer Martinez from Festival Security. He said one of his patrol officers thinks he might have spotted something near the community garden, on the far edge of the park grounds. It's pretty far from the main festival area, but he wants us to come take a look. David was already moving before Robert finished talking. Let's go. Now. They walked quickly through the mostly empty festival grounds toward the area Officer Martinez had mentioned. David had never even noticed there was a community garden adjacent to the park. It was quite a distance from the main festival activities, probably a quarter mile from where Sophie had disappeared. As they approached the garden area, David could see it was much quieter than the rest of the festival grounds. There were a few benches scattered around, some walking paths and small plots where local residents grew vegetables and flowers. Street lamps provided dim lighting, but it was peaceful and secluded. That's when Officer Martinez appeared, walking quickly toward them. Mr. Chen, I want you to stay calm and move slowly. Officer Johnson was doing a perimeter check when he noticed someone sitting on one of the benches over there. He pointed toward a bench about 50 yards away, partially hidden by some trees. David squinted in the dim light and could barely make out 2 figures on the bench, what looked like an adult and a much smaller person beside them. Is it her? David whispered, afraid to hope. We can't be certain from this distance, but the smaller figure appears to be a child wearing light-colored clothing. We want to approach carefully so we don't startle anyone. David's legs felt like jelly, but he forced himself to walk slowly toward the bench. With each step he could see more clearly. There was definitely an adult. It looked like an older woman with gray hair, and next to her, curled up against her side, was a small child in what looked like a yellow dress. His heart nearly stopped. It was Sophie. She appeared to be sleeping peacefully, her head resting against the woman's shoulder. The woman was gently stroking Sophie's hair and appeared to be humming something softly. David wanted to run forward and grab his daughter, but Officer Martinez put a restraining hand on his arm. Let's approach slowly. We don't want to frighten the child or the woman. We don't know the situation yet. As they got closer, David could see more details. The woman appeared to be homeless. Her clothes were worn and she had several bags around her feet. She looked to be in her 60s or 70s with kind eyes and gentle hands. Most importantly, Sophie looked completely safe and peaceful in her care. The woman noticed them approaching and looked up. Instead of appearing nervous or defensive, she smiled softly and began to stand up carefully, trying not to wake Sophie. Are you her father? She asked quietly, her voice warm and gentle. Yes, David managed to say, his voice thick with emotion. Yes, I'm her dad. Sophie stirred at the sound of his voice and opened her eyes sleepily. When she saw David, her face lit up with the most beautiful smile he had ever seen. Daddy, she said happily, reaching out her arms to him. I knew you would find me. Grace told me you would come. David rushed forward and scooped Sophie into his arms, holding her so tightly that she giggled. Oh, sweetheart, I was so scared. Are you okay? Are you hurt? I'm okay, Daddy. Grace took care of me. She's really nice. David looked over Sophie's head at the woman, Grace, who was gathering her belongings and preparing to leave quietly. She looked like she was trying to slip away without causing any trouble. Wait, David called out to her. Please don't go. I need to thank you. Grace turned around and David could see tears in her eyes. "She's a special little girl," Grace said simply. "When I found her crying by the pond, she was so scared. But she's very brave." Officer Martinez stepped forward. "Ma'am, can you tell us what happened? How did you find Sophie?" Grace looked a bit nervous about talking to the police, but she answered honestly. "I was sitting by the pond area earlier, just watching people enjoy the festival. I saw this little one by herself crying. She said she couldn't find her daddy. I waited to see if anyone would come looking for her, but after a while, I could tell she was getting more upset." "So you brought her here?" David asked, still holding Sophie tightly. "I thought maybe if we sat somewhere quiet, away from all the noise and crowds, it might be easier for you to find her. I was hoping someone would come looking in this direction eventually." Grace smiled at Sophie. "We've been having nice conversations, haven't we, sweetheart?" Sophie nodded enthusiastically. "Grace knows lots of songs, Daddy, and she told me stories about butterflies and angels." David felt overwhelming gratitude toward this woman who had taken care of his daughter when he couldn't. But there was something else, something in the way Sophie seemed so comfortable with Grace, as if she had known her much longer than a few hours. "Grace," David said, "I don't know how to thank you for taking care of her. You saved her. You saved both of us." Grace was about to respond when Sophie tugged on David's shirt and whispered something that made his heart skip a beat. "Daddy? Grace sings the same songs that Mommy used to sing to me." David stared at Sophie in shock. "What did you say, sweetheart?" "Grace knows Mommy's songs," Sophie repeated innocently, snuggling closer to her father. "She sang the butterfly song and the sleepy star song, just like Mommy used to." David looked at Grace with confusion and growing curiosity. These weren't popular children's songs that everyone would know. Lisa had made them up herself, creating special lullabies just for Sophie. They were deeply personal songs that Lisa used to sing every night before bedtime, songs that Sophie had never heard from anyone else. Grace seemed to understand David's puzzled expression. She stepped closer, her weathered hands clasped in front of her, and spoke softly so only he could hear. "When I found your little girl by the pond, she was crying so hard," Grace began gently. "She kept saying, 'I want my mommy, I want my mommy.' It broke my heart. I asked her to tell me about her mommy, thinking it might calm her down." David listened intently, still holding Sophie close. "She told me that her mommy went to heaven but still watches over her. She said Mommy used to sing special songs that nobody else knew, so I asked her if she could teach me one of those songs, thinking it might help her feel better." Grace's eyes grew misty as she continued. "That's when something very strange happened. As Sophie started to hum one of the melodies, I found myself knowing the words. It was like they just came to me from somewhere deep inside. I started singing along and Sophie's eyes got so wide. She said it sounded exactly like when her mommy sang it." David felt a chill run down his spine. This was impossible. Grace was a complete stranger. How could she possibly know Lisa's made-up lullabies? Officer Martinez had been listening to the conversation and decided to give them some space. "I'm going to radio in that we found Sophie safe and sound," he said, walking away to make his calls. Grace looked directly at David with kind but serious eyes. "Your little girl told me something else that I think you need to hear." Sophie had fallen asleep again in David's arms, exhausted from her long adventure. Grace motioned for David to sit down on the bench so they could talk quietly without waking her. "Sophie told me that sometimes her mommy comes to visit her in her dreams," Grace said softly. "She said that last night her mommy told her that angels sometimes look like regular people, and that they would be there to help when she needed them most." David's throat tightened. Sophie had never mentioned dreams about Lisa to him before. "She told you that?" "Yes. And she said something else that made me understand why I was meant to find her today." Grace paused, choosing her words carefully. "She said her mommy told her to look for someone with gentle hands like Grandma used to have, if she ever got scared and couldn't find you." Grace held up her hands, old and weathered, but clearly gentle. "When I found Sophie crying, the first thing she did was look at my hands. Then she stopped crying and let me comfort her. She said I had the right kind of hands." David felt tears building in his eyes. Lisa's mother had passed away just a few months before Sophie was born. But Lisa used to talk constantly about her mother's gentle hands and how safe they made her feel as a child. "There's more," Grace continued. "While we were sitting here waiting for you to find us, Sophie told me that her mommy's favorite thing about the festival would have been the butterflies. She said there was a whole tent full of live butterflies that her mommy would have loved. David's heart nearly stopped. There was indeed a butterfly exhibit at the festival, but he and Sophie hadn't visited it yet. They hadn't even walked past it. Sophie couldn't have known it existed. Grace reached into one of her bags and pulled out something that made David's hand shake. It was a small handmade bracelet woven from colorful threads with tiny butterfly charms attached to it. "I made this for Sophie while we were sitting here," Grace said. "I always carry craft supplies with me. But the strange thing is, I didn't bring any butterfly charms to the festival today. I checked my bag 3 times. Yet somehow, when I reached for supplies to make her a bracelet, these butterfly charms were there." David stared at the bracelet, his mind reeling. Lisa had collected butterfly jewelry. She had boxes of it at home. She always said butterflies represented transformation and the soul's journey to heaven. Grace leaned closer to David and spoke in a whisper that only he could hear. "Your daughter kept telling me that her mommy was watching over both of us today. She said her mommy wanted to make sure Sophie felt safe until her daddy could find her. And she said—" Grace paused, her voice growing even softer. "She said her mommy wanted me to tell you something very important." "What?" David whispered back, his heart pounding. Grace looked directly into his eyes. "She wanted you to know that love doesn't end when someone goes to heaven. It just finds new ways to show itself. And sometimes the people who seem least likely to help are exactly the ones sent to save us." David felt like he couldn't breathe. Those weren't Grace's words. Those were the exact words Lisa had written in a letter she left for him before she died. A letter he had never shown to anyone, not even Sophie. A letter he kept locked in his safe at home. Grace seemed to understand the impact of her words. "I don't pretend to understand how or why these things happen," she said gently. "But I've learned in my life that there are connections between people that go deeper than what we can see or explain. Your little girl was never really lost today. She was being watched over." David looked at Grace with new eyes. "What's your story? How did you end up here?" Grace smiled sadly. "I used to be a pediatric nurse at Children's Hospital. I worked there for 35 years, taking care of sick children and their families. 3 years ago, I lost my own family in a house fire. My husband, my daughter, my 2 grandchildren, all gone in one night." David's heart ached for her loss. "After that, I couldn't go back to work. I couldn't function. I lost everything, my home, my job, my will to live. I've been on the streets ever since, just trying to get through each day. But today," Grace continued, "when I saw your little girl crying and scared, something inside me woke up again. For the first time in 3 years, I felt like I had a purpose. Like maybe there was a reason I survived when my family didn't." David stood up, still holding the sleeping Sophie, and made a decision that would change all their lives. "Grace," he said firmly, "I don't believe in coincidences. I believe you were meant to find Sophie today, and we were meant to find you. I want to offer you something. Not just the reward money, but a job. Sophie needs someone like you in her life, someone with gentle hands and a caring heart. Would you consider being her nanny?" Grace's eyes filled with tears. "Are you serious?" "I'm completely serious." Sophie was right. Her mother did send an angel to watch over her today. "And maybe Lisa sent you to help both of us heal." Grace looked at the sleeping child in David's arms, then back at his hopeful face. "I would be honored," she said softly. As they walked back toward the festival lights together, David carrying Sophie, Grace carrying her few belongings, and all 3 of them carrying hope for a brighter future, David realized that sometimes the most beautiful miracles come disguised as ordinary moments. Sometimes love really does find new ways to show itself,